Hello and welcome back. I am Dr. Lori Williams, and today we have a guest that is going to join us for today's conversation. And her name is Carla Center, and Carla is a relationship coach. Thank you so much for being here, Carla. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Lori. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. We have a very, very good topic of conversation today. It's definitely in Carla's wheelhouse as a relationship coach. It's in my wheelhouse because it's all about, self-healing and things like that. So let's get started. Our topic of conversation today is how to heal relationships through self-love. So, Carla, how do you perceive that self-love is going to be the catalyst into healing our relationships?
First off, is when we're going to heal our relationships, we definitely are very aware of what the other person is doing, and we don't necessarily realize that a lot of it has to do with our perception, and that we have our own wounds and our own perceptions about other people's behavior, and we can't change anybody else's behavior. That's the first thing. Like
Mhm.
what other people choose to do, other people choose to do, but we can change our behavior, and it's
It's easier
not
to point
about
out other people's issues, though. That's the easy part.
right. Exactly. We can be super hard on ourselves too. Like it's not like most of us aren't like super hard on ourselves, but we try to change ourselves to be somebody we're not to make the relationship work.
Mhm.
And so when you do self-love, which many of us are taught, especially women, that that's selfish, right? Self-love
Yes, for sure.
equals being selfish. You're
Mhm.
supposed to be selfless, and that's how you have this loving relationship. But truly, if you learn to love yourself, if you learn to heal the things that have shaped how you view the world and view other people,
Mhm.
life is so much more joyous and lighter and happier because when you interact with other people, you have your perspective. It may not even be what they're thinking or saying, but what you are hearing is totally different, totally
Exactly.
different.
Mhm.
And when we're in that space, if we don't learn to step back and try and take a look at what's going on from a healed perspective of ourselves, we love ourselves. We need to understand what my stuff is and what's really yours.
Mhm.
Being able to do that, and you can't do that unless you have done some self-love and some self-healing because your triggers are just going out of
Oh,
all
for
over the
sure.
place.
The one thing that I really like about it is the fact that, like, as someone who is a recovering control freak, for control freaks, this is actually completely up your alley because a lot of the times we try to fix the other person
Mhm.
because we're trying to control the situation. I mean, especially if it's
Right.
somebody you really love, you don't want to lose them. You put everything that you are into trying to fix them because you think that's where your control is. But in reality and in truth, your control is not in changing anybody else, it's in changing yourself. So it's not really a matter of letting go of control and just, letting the chips fall where they may, so to speak. It's learning to shift your control from the other, trying to control the other person, which is only going to cause more distance and more animosity and more resentment in the relationship, to focusing on how can I show up differently in this relationship. And bring that back to you. That is actually where your true power and control is in what you're doing with yourself. The beautiful thing of it is when you look at yourself from that perspective, literally there's like a ripple effect that goes out into your relationships, that your relationships just become so much more beautiful without you having to try so hard. You get to show up as your true and authentic self. And I mean, that means, and Carla, I know as a relationship coach, you've dealt with clients that, that you end up losing a lot of, or you could potentially lose relationships through working on
Right.
yourself, right? And because holding on to relationships is toxic for us too. Holding on to things, relationships that don't serve us is very toxic for us as well. So in healing yourself, you may end up subsequently losing some relationships because they're not healthy for you. And I think everybody eventually, and I would like your input on this as well, Carla. I think everybody eventually who is on the self-love journey, like self-discovery journey, they realize when they get to a point where they need to let a relationship go, that they do realize it's for the best. And it doesn't mean that they're not upset. Doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt, but it's the transition, I think, is a little bit easier once you see that it's not helping you, but it's if you're not helping, or if it's not, the relationship isn't helping you, it's also not helping the other person. And sometimes the best thing we can do to show somebody we actually really truly love them unconditionally is to let them go, even though we do
Right.
love them for sure.
Right.
Um,
Right.
what's your perception on that?
Well, because it's really hard to step back and see why we're in a relationship with somebody.
Mhm.
Um, because we want to be loved, we want to be accepted. But if our relationship is totally about fulfilling those needs, which we can fulfill for ourselves, by the way, you
Mhm.
see time and time again that love relationship's supposed to fill this hole in me, right?
Mhm.
And we're not supposed to fill a hole in ourselves.
Right.
But once we are in a space where we completely love ourselves and we are in a relationship with somebody, friendship, romantic relationship, family relationship, where we
Mhm.
can do it, we're doing it out of compassion and love, not out of what comes to us, right? And sometimes we're like, well, I'm not in it for what comes to me. But if you really, really sit down and understand that sometimes it's to be accepted, it's
Mhm.
to feel love because I don't want to be alone, because I'm not comfortable being alone with myself.
Mhm.
And once you get to that space, you realize that you are creating a healthier relationship with somebody. There's less resentment, there's
Mhm.
less anger. You know, when you reach out to somebody, it's not to make sure they feel a certain way or you feel a certain way, but because you truly love them and
Right.
you want to have this connection. And it is a back and forth connection
Mhm.
that is not, it's very authentic. It's not
For sure.
created from these needs from each other that just fulfill some thing from really childhood that we don't realize is sitting
Yeah.
out there, you
Something that we
know?
perceive that we haven't received from our parents essentially is where it comes from for
Right.
sure. And I love what
Yeah.
you're talking about too. It's that like the I talk a lot about like the energy of things, and the energy of a healthy relationship should be like a full circle. It's like I love you, you love me, and it goes back and forth. But if it's like, say like if the relationship, like say for an example, mine and your relationship, because we're friends outside of our workspace, we're friends as well. And the one thing that makes our friendship so beautiful is the fact that Carla and I are actually both the kind of people that our like kind of soul mission in our relationships is we feed the other person. And when you're like energetically feeding that, or like filling that other person up, that's when your relationships truly become beautiful. It's because, like Carla's always coming from a perspective of how can I show up in this relationship as my true and authentic self and, to be the best version of myself for myself first and foremost, but also for my relationships. And the
Right.
relationship with us is no different. So it's that when you have that energy, that full circuit energy, the energy between two people doesn't become stagnant. And essentially, when these relationships are ready to fall apart, there's a certain amount of stagnancy in that relationship. So I mean, the other thing is too is like, I mean, you could see that the relationship is ready to fall apart, and then all of a sudden you've worked on yourself and you've taken, your traits that maybe weren't necessarily the for the benefit of the relationship. You're able to change those, and then in turn make that relationship healthier than it's ever been, which is actually a really beautiful concept as well. So I love how all of that, it all just works, I guess, seamlessly, right? When you're truly able to show up as yourself, it doesn't matter to you so much if the other person doesn't. It's like you can accept them from a different level, like accept their humanness. And I think a lot of the times when we're coming from a place of trauma or lack of self-love, we're expecting, like you said, to somebody to fill that void, that for them to be the part of us that we're not yet.
Right.
And what a huge disservice to expect that of somebody else when you can fully give that to yourself and then
Right.
take them off the hook for that.
Right. And you write these stories in your head about what somebody's actions mean when you're that way in your relationship. And
Mhm.
it's not like we're consciously going, I'm gonna think the worst about somebody or whatever, but you need to paint a picture that fits in what your belief is about yourself
Right.
and what you are going to get out of a relationship. So the more you love yourself, the more you accept yourself, the more you understand this is me. I'm human. I'm not perfect.
Hmm.
but I love me anyway. I
Mm-hmm.
love me anyway. And I love all the little things that once upon a time I thought was wrong with me. I had
Yes.
created this belief that I can't be this person, I can't be that person. So you try so hard to be this person you believe you're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel so unaligned, not only with your relationships, but everything in your life. You feel so overwhelmed because nothing feels good, because you're not aligned in who you are. You don't love who you are because you're not being yourself, because you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to be who one of your parents thought you should be, somebody, in your childhood, even as little kids, somebody said something to you and that made you try to be somebody else. And
I
then
call
you
that the
feel so
chameleon phase.
exhausted.
I
Yes.
feel that it's very much a chameleon. It's like I have to fit in with whoever other people need me to be or expect me to be. And it's like, at what point do you say, I get to be me? Like, you will never, in my opinion, and in my own experience, in my experience with my clients, you will never have so much peace as until the moment you give yourself permission to be 100% authentically who you are.
And you feel, like I said, this joy and this peace. In a way, it enhances your relationships so much. And yes, some people will fall away,
Yeah.
and if you see that as, this is not, we served a purpose in each other's lives with this relationship, and maybe someday it will come back,
Right.
but I'm not going to focus on that, because I'm learning to be me, to love me, to accept me, and the right people will be in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And those that fall away are on their own journey, and that's not about me.
Right.
That's their journey.
Mm-hmm.
And they get to, and you do it out of love and compassion, and it, like Lori said earlier, you grieve it.
Yes.
I'm not saying that, because sometimes they're really long friendships and then you realize, okay, we served a purpose in each other's life and it was toxic to me. It was not the healthiest relationship for me, and that's not just their fault, by the way. You have
Right.
to accept, okay, this was my part in it, and I get to accept that, because I don't want to take part in another relationship this way. So as I love and accept myself, accept all parts of me, and are like, okay, there was a reason why this worked for me at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I see it, now that I love myself, now that I accept that my authentic self is pretty damn cool.
Mm-hmm. They always are.
I don't need
Spoiler
that. I
alert.
don't need I don't need the coping skills that I had in that relationship. And maybe someday we'll come back to a friendship that's better than we ever thought before. And I have a friend, we didn't talk for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And my perception of what happened and her perception of what happened were very different, because we talked about this when we reconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And not to do blame, but I wanted to share with her what my perception was, so that she knew, not to make her change. That's not it. But so that I could share with her the hurt parts of me that perceived her behavior differently than she perceived it, right?
Right.
And that I have moved past that, and that will no longer be a thing, because I don't want her to think, oh, nobody should walk on eggshells in a relationship. That is
Exactly.
not a healthy relationship,
I was gonna
right?
say that's probably the first sign that it's toxic, or at least it's not in
Right.
alignment for sure. Even if it's not as far
Right.
as going like toxic, it's definitely not aligned.
Yeah, and if you self-love yourself, you do not walk on, self-love does not equal walking on eggshells in a relationship. You're like,
You can't
okay, for
walk on
for some
eggshells and be
reason this
authentic.
doesn't work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can't
okay,
walk on
this is
eggshells and be
not
authentic.
working for me. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's how we get those relationships, is we're changing who we are. I don't want to say this, I don't want to do this.
Hmm.
Well, maybe that person's not the right person to be in your life at this moment. And like I said, it can come back together. And me and this friend, like, our relationship, all of the great stuff is right back where it was, but we've expanded, right? And our
Right.
friendship has expanded. And the same, my soon to be husband, I've known him for 40 plus years,
Hmm.
and we've come into each other's lives multiple times. It was never toxic, but it wasn't really a close relationship. Like, he was an acquaintance, right? I knew him.
Right.
He was also a friend. Then he became a friend, and now, like,
Now
he
you're
is
gonna
my
get married.
person. Now
Yeah.
we're going to get married, right?
Mhm.
Um, but if I hadn't done my healing and learned to love myself, we would have headed down a really ugly path,
Mhm.
because that was I needed that hole filled that
Right.
only I can fill.
Hmm. For sure.
you know, and that I had to do that through self-love to learn that I'm not being selfish by taking
Right.
care of myself, that I can look at my fault and not judge myself,
Hmm.
be like, okay, this was a coping mechanism that I understand where it came from, but this is not going to work for me for what I want in my life going forward.
Hmm. 100%. I was actually going to say that, like for me, in healing myself, there has been some relationships that have fallen away where I was like, at one point, I was like, I'm going to heal and then I'm going to work on getting that relationship back. That was my intention when it first started.
Right.
But after I healed, I was like, no, I don't want that relationship back.
Right.
There is no parts of that relationship that was good for me. And energetically, when we're taking up space or when somebody else is taking up space in our lives that shouldn't necessarily be there or isn't necessarily aligned with us, keep in mind that that person is taking up space from somebody who is aligned with us and who should be in our
Right.
lives. And also, we're that person for the other person in the relationship, right? So if we're taking up space in their life, we're holding up space for people that should be in their life as well.
Right.
It never goes one way. It's always, you're always like, there's always two sides to
Yes,
it.
it
The
is.
energy of it, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And love. So every day, find a way to love yourself. And it's not all about massages and
No,
fruits and all the stuff
yeah,
that we see in the media. Am I taking time to breathe, to just breathe and be with myself? Going on nature walks. Like I have taught clients how to do things that they thought they would never do. They're like, I
mhm,
can't meditate. And as Lori can attest, meditation can make a huge difference in your life.
for self
And
connection,
sometimes at
especially.
first you think you
Yep.
can't,
Right.
right?
Hmm. It's because you have it
And then you
in your
get,
mind of how it's supposed to be.
yes, exactly. And then you find, oh my gosh, this is a reset point for me. Or breathing. We're like, well, we all breathe. Um,
Not deeply
and,
enough. No.
right. No, no, we don't. And I had somebody I worked with one time that I was the client, and she goes, how long have you been holding your breath? And I say,
How old am I
I
now?
didn't even know I was, and so which made me very aware of talking to clients. And the reason I share so much of my story is because these are the things that I also see in clients, right?
Mhm.
It's not only part of my journey, but the people that I have worked with have very similar stuff to what I had. I thought when I went to college to do psychology, I thought, oh, I'm just going to go in, I'm just going to help people. And all it takes is an education. Really, it takes experience, being honest with yourself to be the best at what you can be. As Lori knows, like the reason we share our healing journey is because we couldn't be the best at what we do if we didn't do it ourselves.
100%.
So, we had to learn to do self love too.
Mhm.
And it has the reason her and I can have a friendship was we both did that. Like, we, my perception is we both were givers until we had nothing left to give,
Yep.
right? But we wouldn't take back, right? Because that's selfish.
We both still struggle with that, but we also call each other out on it.
Yes. But you know what I mean? So the thing about self-love is that you learn to fill your cup up. And you can be so much better in a relationship if your cup is full and you're not expecting someone else. So if your spouse or your friend is having a bad day, you can see it from a perspective of there's something going on with them and not somebody's doing something to me.
There's no triggering.
Yep. And
That's what the
so
healing gets rid
self
of, is the
love
triggers.
keeps you from having so many triggers, right?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
you're not like in this perspective of everything you do, you're doing to me. Instead, you're like, okay, my perspective's my perspective, theirs is theirs. What's going on with them that I can support them, right?
It's a difference
Instead of
between
like,
being right and being understood. And literally,
yes,
it's, you have a choice to say, okay, do I want to be right in this, or do I want to understand myself? Not be right as far as the other person, and not to understand as far as the other person necessarily. It's all about you. It's like, do I want to prove myself right? Because our brains naturally do, like, uncover things so that it can prove us right. And you can always figure out how to prove yourself right.
Yep.
Just
You
change it
can
by
always
changing your
find
perspective.
backup.
Yeah, 100%. Or do you like, and this is what I tell my clients all the time. One of the biggest things you can do for self-love is call yourself out on your own shit every
Yep.
single time, because that's one of the hardest things to do. And say, damn, you know what? Even if my toxic trait in the relationship is that I stayed too long in that relationship, that's still something that we've got to take on our as our own, but not from
Mhm.
a place of shaming yourself, which is what we tend to
No.
do, from a place of wanting to grow and wanting to be better for yourself in that next relationship, or even in the current relationship. If you want to be a better version of yourself for that current relationship, it all starts within 100%.
Right, right. Because love and compassion for yourself equals love and compassion for other people when they have stuff, because then you're like, okay, I'm not coming from out. One of the sayings that I say is you can be right or you can be happy, because you
That's
can't
true.
have both,
Hmm.
And so if you're like, okay, I don't need to be right, there might be something, because through the neuroscience, you get like, they say between 90 and 90% of the stuff is filtered out, right?
Yeah.
And so we get 1 to 10% of what really happens. So that's why we have very different versions, just in case you guys didn't know, like your perception and other person's perception is never going to be the same. And a third person's will be different. And the truth is somewhere mixed of all of it. So if you can come from a place of compassion and understand their perception is most likely very different from yours, but understanding what's my part in my perception of their behavior
Right.
and my behavior, and from a place of love and compassion, which you can't do until you learn to love yourself and treat yourself with love and compassion.
Hmm. 100%. So, as a relationship coach, and obviously, basically, what we're talking about in this entire conversation is the best way to love yourself. If somebody listening is like, I have no idea what I'm doing, how I want to start, but I know I need to do this for myself, what would be one tip that is very beginner friendly, that's going to have an enormous impact on their life? What that you would suggest, like as a starting spot for people?
The very first thing I would do, first, is when you start feeling like, wake up in the morning, take some deep breaths. Don't go straight to your list of things you have to do. Our morning routine equals what our day is, by the way, which
At the
can be
tone.
very difficult, as Lori and I can attest,
Hmm.
very difficult to shift. So find something small in the morning you can do differently. Um, Journal all the positives about yourself. And you might be very shocked at how little you think about yourself, how little you're like, these are beautiful things about me. If I told you to write down all of the negatives about yourself, most likely you could fill pages, because that's
Books,
how we
books
are.
of them, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I would start each morning, because we want to start seeing ourselves in a different way, either journaling the different positive things about yourself. And I don't care what they are. You might be like, well, it's just little things, but what are some things you like about yourself, right?
Mhm.
Non-judgment. And if you are like, I don't like to write stuff down, I don't want, there's reasons why people don't like to write. Sit there, take some deep breaths, and think about it.
Mhm.
What are the things I like about myself? I would start my morning that way, just to make it a habit to start my morning with feeling good about who I am,
Right.
comfortable in my own skin.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of my clients, what I do is I create meditations for them to do exactly that, because we have to it's about retraining your brain,
100%.
retraining your brain into believing the positive things about ourselves.
Mhm.
Um,
We're so quick
and
to see the negative and get
yeah,
stuck in the negative. And yeah, you got to switch that. You got to like rewire everything that's going on up
right,
here
right.
for
And
sure.
one way to absolutely know that you're somebody that has a hard time with it is, how do you react when somebody compliments you? Are you very uncomfortable?
Yeah,
Right? Right?
exactly. Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm sure I have self-love. Okay, what happens if somebody compliments you?
or tries to
Right.
do
Like,
something for you, and you like have this like urge, I'm, oh my God, I gotta pay them back somehow. Like they're gonna think
right,
horribly
right.
of me if I don't pay them back. It's like you can't to be receptive of anything. Typically, if you struggle with self-love, that's going to be a huge red flag for
Right,
sure.
right. And so just start with thinking positive about yourself, right? Like
Hmm.
you can do it different ways. You can meditate on and let things come to you. You can write it down. You can go for a walk and just do some self-talk about the positive things. You have to find what works for you for sure.
Hmm.
Um, as we both know, healing is not linear.
Right.
So we each have to find what works for us. And that's why all my clients, I always start with one-on-one because we got to find what works for you, right? Like,
Sure.
um, but truly start with your self-talk because I'll bet you that you'll catch yourself multiple times a day criticizing yourself, but you rarely catch yourself saying positive things about yourself. So if you start your morning with saying positive, you'll start to shift from that self-criticism.
You start noticing it. Like it starts to like it almost like it hurts a little bit now. One thing, and I never
Mhm.
even realized this. Now this is going back what 11 years when I started my journey. And one thing that I noticed very quickly about the way that I was talking about myself is, and this seems like even looking back now, it seems so small, but I used to, if I did something, I'd be like, oh my God, why'd you just do that? That's so stupid. Like, but then when I actually started looking at how many times a day I was telling myself that, I stopped counting one day at 23 times I told myself that.
Mhm.
Everything you say to yourself, you're listening.
Mhm.
And it's like, would you talk to a child like that? Would you talk to your best friend like that? Would you, if you went and talk to your child, your best friend, or somebody that you love, the way you talk to yourself, you are the one person that you're going to spend from birth to death with you. You're the only person that's in
Mhm.
your life from start to finish. And it's like everybody else outside of you deserves that love that you give, except yourself. And it's like,
Right.
nah, that's not it. That's not the right
Right.
answer. So yeah,
No,
it's
and
it's it's just a matter of recognizing it might seem like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. Like, and I never consciously thought that I was a stupid person. I have never thought I was a stupid person, but I kept calling myself stupid. So when things would come up, because I'd been telling myself, at least 23 times a day that like what my actions are stupid, when I come to something, it's like, oh, should I do that or shouldn't I? Instantly, I've got this real, you're so stupid, you're so stupid, you're so stupid. Because that's what I've told myself for however many years. So we definitely pay attention to the thoughts that you're having throughout the day, and you're really going to start to notice where you're chastising yourself the most, and why you're getting that stuck feeling, or why you can't keep moving forward, or you can't move past this, or you can't move into that. It's never about, it's always something that's going on either in your mind. I'm not saying it's in your head by any means, but it's in your head mentally or
yeah,
emotionally is what's going to stop us.
right.
Relationships are no different, especially the relationship with yourself.
Right. And if you think about it, so if somebody had told you you were stupid, it would have been a trigger for you.
Hmm.
And part of it's because that's what you're telling yourself. And then you're like, oh my gosh, somebody else sees it, even though you're not conscious of that's what's really going on. But if somebody told you once you've rewired to be like, I'm not stupid. I know I'm not stupid. And somebody said that to you, you're just like, I don't know what their deal is. And you just brush it off, right? There's
Yeah.
not that emotional reaction to it. But as long as you're telling yourself these negative things, whenever somebody says something that could feed that
Hmm.
narrative in your head, like it triggers some emotions.
Oh, for sure. And they're not that's when anger, rage, like they're the not so nice emotions that are coming out at that point. But
Right,
it's not about them, it's about us. 100% of the
right,
time it is.
right.
Thank you so much for joining me, Carla. I very much appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you taking the time to come and join us on today's video or podcast, depending on where you're listening from. Did you have anything last minute? I'm going to be putting Carla's link. If you guys wanted to set up sessions with her, you'll have a link to be able to contact her directly. And again, I want to say thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, absolutely. And just everyone remember that you are worthy. just being your authentic self, and your relationships flourish when you see it.
100%. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you guys back here next time.